All right. So, without any delays, let's introduce our speaker today. Dr. Bonita Sharma. Dr. Sharma is an associate professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio, College for Health, Community, and Policy, Social Work. Her research uses sustainable development goals as main framework to understand and address women's health issues such as HIV and reproductive health and well-being within the socio-economic and environmental contexts, both locally and globally. Her other global health research interests include environmental justice, place-based initiatives, and natural and built environment. She has served on several national and international committees, including our own NACA Events Committee, to mention one of them. But one of the ones that I'd like to highlight is that she has served on a Council on Global Social Issues. It's a Council on Commission on Global Social Work Education. So she's very well known in her field. She's currently a champion fellow at the Center for Health Equity Research Center at Charles Drew University, and an affiliated faculty with the Center for Community-Based and Applied Health Research at UTSA, sorry. That's University of Texas, San Antonio. She has an outstanding record of publication in her field, mostly in very prestigious journals. She will be today she'll be discussing about the importance of abstract introduction and methods specifically in manuscript writing. Dr. Sharma, thanks for being here today and sharing your thoughts on this very important component of manuscript writing. So welcome to our series, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Namaste. Thank you for that great introductions. So I'm very happy to be here to present a little bit of my knowledge in writing an abstract, introduction, and methodology on for developing a manuscript or a paper for publication. That's my email address for any future communications, and I'm at the University of Texas at San Antonio. So here's an outline of what I will talk about today. So I know this presentation is about abstract introduction and method, but I felt like it's incomplete without talking about publishing, in peer-reviewed journal, or how to look for the format and things like that, and where to publish. It's a good idea to have that before you get started sometimes, and sometimes you'll come to it afterwards, after you're done with your manuscript. So we'll talk about that, abstract writing, how to write an introduction, and writing qualitative methodology, and a little tips on on writing and pacing yourself on that. So, just before you start writing, and if you have an idea of the topic that you are looking to publish in, or you already have a draft to work with, and you are looking to, like, you have an almost complete paper, and you are looking to publish in a journal, and you're looking for a journal, to house your manuscript in. So, it's important to decide which journal to send your manuscript to. Sometimes even it's a great idea to have more than one journal information. We all have experienced rejection in publication, so it's a good idea to have a series of those. So the first thing, just enter keywords and find the journals you're publishing in. Some of the examples that I will use here today are from your public health field and some social work and public health. So I come from a social behavioral perspective in generating this, presenting on writing this manuscript. So, in deciding your journal to publish in, look for aims and scope of the journal, and look at what, topic area, what mission they have, what goals they have in publications. So, for example, I think this is one of your top journal in American Journal for Public Health. It's highly very public health, some technical, very theoretical, policy, practice related issues, or social work in public health aligns with public health and provides that social behavioral aspect of it too. So you could, look into that key area, and then also. Does the purpose of your paper align with that journal, and do you have something to contribute to the dialogue in that journal? Is important as well. So I would say look at what are some of the recent published articles. So this one is actually coming up in 2025. Well, I have an example in a little bit, and so do that. And then the other thing to look for is what we know as journal impact factor or matrix of the journal. How soon do they publish? How long does it take for them to publish? What are some of the formats, and how many word counts do they allow? So those are some of the things to look at. And if you usually go to a journal homepage, they will have author instruction or author guidelines to look for. And so, or even there's call for papers if that matches yours. That's something to look into. And that gives you a good structure. For example, an abstract can be sometimes 250 words to only 150 words allowed. Or, the text can be sometimes 5,000 words to 9,000 words, depending on the journal you're looking at. If you're publishing in a qualitative journal or a mixed method journal, they may allow even more. I think the social work and public health allows up to 30 pages for qualitative journals. So that is important for you to look at, because if you are developing a manuscript or you're done, preparing one, you may have to edit down your words to kind of fit to these requirements. So also look at what font requirement, what type of citations are needed. So diagram, how do they want the tables to be formatted? These are some things to keep in mind, so you have a good idea going in to write an abstract. So now let's jump to abstract writing. So an abstract provides a snapshot of what your paper is about. Again, before, usually an abstract is written at the very end, once you're done with your entire paper. Some people probably will kind of jot down for each section as they finish. But an abstract is not a thesis statement or not an introduction. It's not like what you will do. It will declare what your paper is about and what it has done already. So that's a key difference to note. When you're writing an introduction, you will be announcing, this is what I will do, as opposed to an abstract writing where you will kind of give a snapshot summary of everything you have done in the paper. So that's important to keep in mind. And Sadiq Dai shared this nice article with me. I don't have the link yet, so perhaps we can share that with you later on, which is, I think, shared by another faculty member, Nepali faculty member, which was a very nice read. I would say everyone read that. So again, this is repeating here, looking for formatting, word count, and such, so that you have a good idea about what to expect in an abstract. Also, in an abstract page, they want you to key in some keywords. These are keywords to help others find your paper, your study methodology, your theoretical approach, your population, or social issue. So, whatever is the highlight, that you would like to make sure that you put that in. Some have a limit of 5 words only. Some may allow more than 5 words for you to key in, right? So that's something to think about in terms of abstract. How to structure now abstract? Well, okay. So some abstracts, some journals want you to have a very structured, background, method, results, findings, conclusion. And some don't care. They want you to kind of provide that without stating it and in a paragraph. That's something probably you see most of the time when you look for journal articles. But regardless of structured or unstructured, make sure you have these key things. So background and objective, like a snapshot of what your study is about, and then provide a method of who the like it's important to highlight the population or the issue that you are highlighting, and then is it important for you to identify location of the data collection. It's so, for example, this study, was conducted in Nepal. If that's something important for you to identify, do that. A timeline between what year to what year, if that's important. Also, a brief, here's what we are doing. Here's the objective of the paper or research question, and then what type of analysis used, regardless of quantitative, qualitative, of mixed method. It's important that you state that there, because when people are looking for example, systematic review or meta-analysis, they're looking for these quantitative analysis technique. They include those in their analysis. So it's important for you to have that information there. Also, results wise, just very key findings that stand out in your research. Add that with some statistical analysis, or if you're doing qualitative research, key in some of the themes that popped up for you. And provide a brief key recommendation or findings from that, so people know what to expect when they are going into the paper deeper and what conclusion you have made, right? So here's an example from the American Journal of Public Health. Again, this is very structured requirement. Their requirement for word limit was 200 for an abstract, and they wanted specific objectives, methods, results, conclusion. And you can see in the methods, they're very specific about, the timeline, where they conducted their research, and what scale did they use. And in the results section, they have provided your statistical analysis confidence interval, or the p-value, for example, and some key findings on your conclusion. And I've included the link to this paper. It's obviously coming up for publication. Of course, this is a very high impact journal. It's like the signature of the Public Health Association, or National Public Health Association. So it's a very challenging one to look at. Here's an example of a social work journal in public health. This one is a qualitative research presented here. It talks about where it's conducted, what's the scope of the study here is from the flood disaster, and it's pointing out how many adults they interviewed. They applied in-depth interviews, so that's your method there. There's a little bit of a piece of results here, and some findings. This one was 150 words allowed in this journal. So it's important to keep in mind what you're looking for, and how do you want to structure what you want to want things to stand out. The other things, the latest thing that's been happening is journals are asking you to make a small video, a presentation of your abstract. So people those journals want your research to go beyond the scope of academics and explain in more simpler terms to people who use in the community and practitioners. So those are some of the examples of the abstract, and I'll take questions after we are done. The next part is the introduction section. So, introduction is the opening section of your paper, the main text of your paper. So it sets the stage for, a background and context. Usually, you want to start with a more if you have space. Now, shorter papers, you want to get to the point. But in papers that journals that allow you to write a little bit more, this is probably where you want to bring in a global picture, a broader picture of the social issue or the public health issue you're presenting on, and then kind of narrow it down to specific area. If, for example, in Nepal, so you can think about the broader scope of mental health is this many percentage, expand on the magnitude and scope, present percentages, numbers, case examples here, or this is probably the place I only recommend where you want to add in a direct quote. I hate direct quotes. If you want to make a statement said by someone, this is probably the place for you to highlight, because this is where you want your reader to get into it and get captured by your topic. And, it gets the reader going in and they understand what you are talking about. And this is also, so in introduction is where you want to identify the relevance of conducting the study, why you are conducting the study, what are some of the past literature that have said something about this research, and where's the gap. So when I talk about literature, some journals that require only small number of words will want you to collapse your literature review and introduction together. And so they just want one short few paragraphs of it. There are some journals that will allow you to, they will specify in your instruction for author introduction and literature review method. Then you want to dive deeper into literature review there, but in the introduction, you just want to give few taste of the literature to the reader, so that you can build on the scope of gap in knowledge, right? And identify that gap in knowledge. This is also where you introduce your concepts and variables, because you don't want your reader to be surprised down the road when they're reading your paper and, oh, where's this variable coming from, right? You don't want that. You want it to be upfront. These are the key concepts that I am going to be talking about, right? And also towards the end, you want to then build it up to your research question, hypothesis, if you are using that, objective, and so forth. So essentially, it's answering, what is the study about? Why is it important? Why does it connect to the existing knowledge, right? What is your contribution to it, to this knowledge? So a little bit more detail here. So again, start with a broader impact scope, followed by bridging to specific context. Again, global issue of mental health, and this is how mental health is in Nepal. This is the scope of it, right? Or what is the problem? Who's involved? Population. This is where you want to introduce your population. Geographical location. We talked about that, right? Present an engaging opening statistics, striking fact, or a real world problem, and then identify the gap. So this hopefully will give you a guide to writing your introduction. Reference prior studies, summarize what is already known in the field, identify what is missing or unclear or under-researched, and develop the need for the current study. Why is it that you need to do this again? Here's what has been done, but this is what I'm doing different here in this study, right? State the purpose of the study. So clearly describe what you are going to address in this. And this is where you want to introduce your general research question. I don't say hypothesis, depending on whether social science, hard science. Some hard sciences introduce hypothesis right away, but research question is kind of what I've seen in more social behavioral journals. So some of the sentence starters for you in opening: climate change is an important issue because in recent years there's been growing concern about what's the global, effects and who's being impacted, right? Narrow context down to this is what previous studies have shown, or research in this area has primarily focused on what, and this is what I'm providing the missing piece, right? So while several scholars have examined, few have considered this population topic or this issue in Nepal or with this particular population or with this methodology, right? Distinguish yourself here. Despite these insights, important questions remain. So identify the gap, right? And however little is known, there's limited evidence. Few studies have explored this issue. This gap in the literature highlights what? And then the purpose of the study, this research seeks to examine, specifically, we investigate the relationship between variable A and your outcome variable, right? So this is kind of the structure of how you write your introduction. And more specifically, a research question should be very important. It should be very upfront for the reader. They shouldn't have to look for what your research question is. And it should be clear, focused, target specific problem, gap, or phenomenon based on what is already known, what is unclear based on the literature review, should define a precise, measurable research question or hypothesis based on your assessment of prior research gaps or theories. So, it should be very clear. These are the variables I'm looking at as predictive variables, and this is what I'm looking for outcome. And your introduction should be focused on that outcome variable. So the predictor variables are the testing variables for you, right? So a good research question establishes context and relationship of the variables. And make sure you have the variables presented in an order that you're going to present your work down the road. You don't want your reader to be scattered down the road. So you presented, climate change, mental health, and perhaps physical health, then present in that manner your findings within that. Stay consistent throughout your paper so people don't feel scattered. So again, more on that, and I'll let you read that. It's more redundant. So sentence starters for this study addresses the following research question, or we hypothesize that, or the guiding question of this paper are some of the ways that you can elaborate your question on. So it should be, research questions should be an open-ended inquiry you want to explore. It frames the problem and guides the study. It should identify the population and the variables. Also, it can be exploratory in qualitative research or more testable in quantitative research, right? We'll talk about that in just a few seconds. So here are some examples. What are the lived experiences of people living with HIV in Nepal? This is very broad. So it leaves your participant to describe what their lived experience is about. So more qualitative research. What factors? So you're looking for specific factors for quantitative influence, ART adherence among people living with HIV in Nepal. So you want to be clear with your research question, what your research design is going to be about. It speaks to that. So hypothesis, again, coming back to it, usually it comes off of your broader research question. Some people in some papers have multiple hypotheses to test. Some people have just so they few ones maybe just included in the methods section. Some people will state it up here, so it's up to you to do that. So it should be a specific testable prediction that provides a possible answer to the research question, states a relationship between variables, cause and effect, correlational, directional, or this increases, this one decreases. So example here, we hypothesize that higher levels of stigma is associated with lower ART adherence among people living with HIV in Nepal. right? So, and your data analysis should support or refute this hypothesis. So you should be able to test it. Usually, again, used in quantitative study. I hope I'm doing okay with the time. I get carried away. So that's kind of the end of your introduction. And so again, as I stated early on, some papers will allow you for more space to write your literature review on, and that's kind of the standard. Some papers will want you to integrate some of those key literature reviews using seminal articles, meaning most popular, as articles in your introduction section. So those are choices there. Also, that's the place where if you're using a theoretical approach, I know I didn't add that here, that's the point before methodology is when you want to introduce your also in at the end of the introduction. This is the framework I am using to explore this research question, right? And then moving on to methodology. So again, writing methodology can be, again, depends on what type of research design you are using in your study. Quantitative paper, qualitative paper, or mixed method paper, right? So approaches of, again, just a brief approach here for qualitative and quantitative. I'm sure you've already been introduced to this idea, and a lot of it will be introduced as more research methods. I think results are being introduced later on. But quantitative comes from a very positivistic philosophical approach. Its main objective is to look at, objectivity, measurement, or generalizability, meaning can you test this study in another setting or in the same setting again? That would, or and can it be applied to more than one population? And so that depends on, again, the rigor of your study. But so those are some of the things. What we talk about is, here's what we tested in Rukum, and it could be applied. This particular intervention could be applied to another rural community in Nepal, right? Based on the rigor of your study. That would be generalizability. And so, example, testing whether higher food insecurity is associated with lower ART adherence, right? I'm very specific here. What would be food insecurity? How would I measure it? I will use a scale for that and to conduct a survey data collection. And, I will test it using a regression analysis, for example. That would be more a quantitative methodology approach. Whereas in a qualitative approach, it's more interpretative approach, right? It focuses on social construction of reality and people's lived experiences. In quantitative, you're probably looking for numbers and how many more people are stating that, whereas in qualitative, you're looking for that outlier, and what are their experiences like, and how do they make meaning out of their lives, right? So the approach of it's important to understand this concept when you're writing your methodology section. So regardless of any method for research design, it's important for all across the board to have ethics overview. And I know there was a presentation early on a few weeks ago on ethics, so I'm not going to go into detail with this, but here are some of the reviews that, Nepal Health Research Council. So in your paper, it's important that if you have particularly collected primary data, it's important to state where your ethics, was clear, where you received your ethics clearance. So if I am conducting data collection and study in Nepal, I make sure that I go through my U.S. internal review board within my university, and I go to Nepal and get clearance from the ethics board in Nepal. Now, more and more, it's encouraged to not only go to that national level, but to receive ethical approval from the indigenous community or the community that you're going to. Is there a leader? Is there a group of decision makers? It's important to get their approval as well, and they understand what this research is about. So I really emphasize that, and that the importance of doing that. Is there a community board? If not, can you establish one so that they can speak for themselves when you are conducting research? So those are some of the ethics issue it's important to pay attention to. So I'm going to move on from here. Writing research methods section. So we'll again provide in a couple of paragraphs what are the characteristics of the population you are using. So again, coming from social behavioral and identify, your population, your social issue, or for example, this study data collection was collected with age groups between 18 to 24, adolescents, right, or youth, and with HIV. So being specific, clear, what's the age group, who are the people, and what's the region identify in Nepal, for example, right? So, and then also provide from what time to what time did you do the data collection? This was from 2023 to 2025. And where was it collected, right? Identify that. So specify if your study uses primary or secondary data. This is probably where you also, and I didn't add that, you want to include what type of data collection did you do? What was your research design? Just kind of briefing there is also important. Were there any associated community partner or organization? Recognize them there, acknowledge them there. We partnered with so-and-so community to collect this data, right? And who were they and how were they involved? They were part of this conversation. Describe that you established a community board, and that from there on we collected this. Give a specific idea to the reader about how you went about collecting your data. That transparency is critical in research. Again, why in quantitative school of thought we say generalizability or replicability is important. Somebody should be able to take the information that you have provided and go back and test it again, step by step. Right? That transparency and clarity is important. Now, if you're using secondary data, specify, for example, demographic health survey for Nepal collected between 2016 to 2020, collected by whom, right? And so it's important and to identify your data source there. Research design, again, be explicit about, are you using experimental, quasi-experimental, cross-section, longitudinal, survey-based? So that should be very clear in that first paragraph. Also qualitative design, for example, did you use a theoretical approach to it, phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, case study, participatory action, community-based approach, community engaged approach. So, specify that. Mixed methods, are you using conversion parallel, collected together, and then, both quantitative and qualitative, and you are kind of analyzing it together, or either explanatory, exploratory, one after the other, right? Be specific. And explain thoroughly how did you approach that, and why did you use that? Why did you think that this research design was fit for this study? And also address any biases in the study design. Did you come from, for example, in quantitative, this was a snowball sampling, and that it was a convenient sampling, whereas in qualitative school of thought, you would provide more information about your prior exposure to the issue and your preconceived ideas about what it is that you already know and what you think about it, right? Kind of laying it out bare so that people know from what approach you are coming from. So that's a very critical aspect of it. Here's an example of methods from AJPH. So the article I showed you early on, is looking at describing the, age group, and population, where, location, what agency did they collect their data from, from what time to what timeline, how did they avoid bias, how did they collect the data randomly. So you can see it in who did they include in the research, who did they exclude in the research. Again, these are things that are very important in on both ends, quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method, right? So again, a little bit more detail on sampling. If your primary data collection, what was your inclusion exclusion criteria? You only included youth from adolescents from 12 to 18 in the study, and you excluded, those who are not cleared from the ethics board, for example, people, you adolescent with a disability, if your research did not have to do that and you did not clear that, right? Or, be more specific. Was your sample theoretically driven? Some approaches in qualitative is grounded theory approach, or thematic saturation is what you want for a qualitative study, right? So was it purposive sampling, convenient sampling? Did you go to this one area and ask the community people to go from word to mouth and bring people in for your study, right? So that will have less generalizability in quantitative scale, but perfectly accepted in qualitative scale. And it's still accepted in quantitative because you still have a contribution to make, but it's important to clarify that. Did you select the entire data set if you use the secondary source, or did you have a subset of the data? Demographic health survey has thousands of sample size population. You may want to just limit to, for example, women experiencing violence, and there's only, 1,500 data sample from this. Describe that, say it, provide clarity. Did you conduct any power analysis for your primary data collection? This is probably the place to put in and add clarity. How did you go about it? What was your sample hoping for? How many did you reach out to? And how many did provide the response? So that's something to add in that section. And then data collection method. What are some of the tools you are using? Specify that clearly, right? If you're using surveys, is it a already established scaled survey like PHQ-SAD for your trauma, or PTSD scale, for example, for mental health, right? Or for food insecurity scale, are you using that? Or, are you using existing data sets? Be very clear about it. Are you using laboratory samples? Are you using specific measurements, weights, right, for nutritional analysis, or height? So those are some of the things to include in describing the method, and again, explaining why this was good. And also data collection tool for qualitative would be, did you have in-depth interviews? Where did you have those interviews? Because the setting matters in qualitative study. Were they comfortable in their space when you were doing that interview? What else did you observe, right? How many people interviewed how many people? Was it a focus group? And how did you handle confidentiality of research if it was a group setting? What observations did you make? What document analysis did you have? And usually, use an open-ended question, start from what is it like to experience, what is it like to live in Nepal with HIV, for example, very broad, open-ended question. And you let the reader, the client, your research participant lead the conversation. So and specify that in your paper. It's very important that a specifically qualitative paper wants you to have, probably you will have a longer method section than quantitative section. In terms of data and measures, again, transparency is important, data cleaning. avoid any personal identifiers, of course. And if you know the name of the person, don't use that. Use alternative name, right? If you have not received clearance from your participants, make sure that you are very discreet about it. Usually in survey data, we take out all the identifiers, right? Specify how did you go about doing that. Specify any missing data analysis you conducted or any applied weights for your data analysis. Address any checks for assumptions that you made for your quantitative data, like normality, independence, homogeneity, variance. Did you treat that data? Did you do log transformation, or how did you address, or did you do how did you address your outliers? So those are important things to mention. Also, and how did you replace that data if there was a missing data, for example? Measures wise, also specify what variables you're using, how are you measuring it. This is the section where you can expand on that tool you used, right? And was there a need to recode any responses? Did you have to collapse any data categories? Did you have, to create a composite score? Did you need to, recode some variables or any skip pattern, identify skip patterns in the survey? So, in other words, record all data cleaning procedures very briefly. And so this can take too large a space, specifically if you are limited in words. You have to be very clever about how you present it, right? Sometimes if a table is needed, use a table. So here's a section from that same very paper. It talks about defined 4 domains, and they collected data on these 4 domains for measures, right? Socioeconomic status, household composition and disability, minority status, language, housing type, example, right? Derived from 5-year average of census data. So, providing all these detailed information about, how did you go about collecting your data to test your hypothesis or answer your research question is important. Again, for here, data analysis. So being very specific about that is very important, of course. So make sure for your quantitative analysis, your analysis aligns directly with your research question. You're stating something else, and then you're testing something else. Also look at the language of it. If you're testing for likelihood, then you're probably doing odds ratio. Or, of course, you're testing for correlation, exploratory, your research question is more exploratory and quantitative. So think about, your analysis. And I think there's a section coming up in other workshops where they go more into the details of this, right? So provide all of that, and trustworthiness and rigor of your analysis is important, right? Was there reliability, value? Did you test for that? Is there validity checks there? Explain it. And then in qualitative, and it's important to identify the whole process of familiarizing yourself with the data, who was involved, and then how did you go about coding for that, or how did you extract themes if you did that? Did you use any theoretical approach to analyze it? Did you have member checking going on, right? So those are also part of your trustworthiness and rigor. And it's very important to establish that. So establishing your positionality, for example, you're somebody who's going from a city and going into a village to get a perspective of someone having a lived experience in the village, and you have to explain what are your biases based on that, right? And whether it's positive, negative, and then also what is your power position? For example, you have more resources compared to this person. This person may have been, impacted negatively through stigma and is not open to that. So if you are coming in, and how are you positioning yourself? Is it a woman who's not comfortable being in front of the rest of the family to talk about it, right? How did you go about conducting that research? Also, address potential bias, and then a credibility statement, right? This is how I'm coming to this research is important to describe. So that, and usually qualitative studies are considered less like transferability means the same as generalizability. Can you take this research findings and apply to another population? Probably limited, right? Acknowledging that is important. Triangulation and audit trials, did you use those? Explain that. What method did you use? Cite that. Those are important to do. Again, triangulation, if you don't know, means like, did you have a focus group and an interview, and you did a literature search, and do all those three aspects of the technique matched, kind of presented the same result, right? So those are things to think about. So that's kind of the writing of your method section there. So in summary, starting from the beginning, know your target journal very well, inside out. Of course, based on, I'm assuming you already know what your research is going to be about at that point. Abstract should be succinct, simplified. You can either go along as you can create it as you go along, or you really technically finish your whole paper and then create this abstract. Make it so attractive, simplified for somebody to read with simple language, right? I cannot emphasize simple language enough. We don't have to use big words on this. And then introduction, set the stage for your research, make it impactful, very clear, very relational, that people can really understand what you're going to be talking about. Present all variables here, relationships. So methodology depends on, again, the type of research question and your research design. And your data collection technique is driven by that, right? And analysis as well. And keep your writing, again, I cannot stress this enough, very transparent, very replicable, and logically are ordered. And that's when people can go back and address it or replicate it. With that, I'll just give you tips for writing. Just start with a good detailed outline. Start with just what I've provided, introduction, and then, background, research question. What comes in your introduction, right? Your thesis statement, research question, relationships. Write those details down, and then go to the next section. Write those details down. Start from there, and then write every day 30 minutes. That really, pays off. If for me, I am a very last minute person. I suffer from ADD, and I need a very focused time. But sometimes allowing myself to say, I'm going to meet with someone online, and we're going to write together, works for me. If that works for you, just put a timer for 30 minutes. And even if you have a writing block and you can't, move forward, look for a journal article that could probably contribute to your writing. Link that in there, add that in there, keep it moving, right? Slow and gradually. You don't have to write on Saturdays and Sundays if that's your off days. Just do 4 or 5 days a week, 30 minutes. Will keep you moving. And then also keep your main message or research question in variables in mind. I usually write it down and put a sticky note in front of me. So when I'm looking for literature, or if I'm looking to do the analysis, or if I need a structure of things, I look at that and it keeps me on track. So I'm not like, if I'm looking at climate change in mental health, I don't, and if I'm not looking at physical health, then I don't need to bring that in the literature, right? I need to stay clear and focused. So that you can tell a coherent story. You're basically telling a story. This is what the issue is, and this seems to be the gap. and I'm going to do the research on this, and this is the approach I'm using, and this is the method I'm using, and this is how I went about it. And here's the result, right? You're telling a story. And so go along with that. Write with clarity, use short sentences, avoid very long sentences, cut it down, period, start again. That's, that direct active voice. We know we analyzed instead of this paper analyzed, right? So using, those simple language, again, avoiding jargons and unspecified abbreviations. Specify your full abbreviation, like United States, US, and then later on start only use US. So consistency is very important for a reader to keep them interested, right? Also cite seminal and recent work. So what is the recent literature within the last 10 years said about your research? What are some of the key research studies that's been done? So that would be the seminal work, like that's been more established. Cite those. And if a historical context is needed, then bring in the historical context, right? Otherwise, try to stay in the very relevant recent research. So that kind of wraps up my tips for writing, as well as the abstract methods and introduction section. So any questions?
All
I
right.
see.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. I think that was outstanding, very, very informative. Even for me, I was learning as you were presenting. One of the things that I wanted to comment on, something that you also kind of said was, because when we do the manuscript writing, I personally think, methods is the easiest section to write. And here is why, because the thing is already done.
Mm-hmm.
So you've already designed your study, you've already conducted the study. Now you just need to be factual and write what you actually did.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so I just thought that I would make that comment. And the other one that you mentioned was know your journal, because every journal has different formats. For example, in the sequence, some have introduction, methods, results, discussion. Some will have methods at the end.
Mm-hmm.
There are some journals which wants most of your methods as a supplement as well.
Uh,
So as
yes.
they say, know thy journal kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes, certainly. Both of those are very important. Yes. Great points on those.
All right, there are some questions there. Dr. Sharma, can you see the chat?
Oh, should I stop sharing? And then I'll open up the chat. Um, I
There's
find
one
it
that
difficult
says,
to start writing. Okay, Amrita. So yes, it's very difficult to start writing, right? I am a big time procrastinator. I pace down the hall back and forth for about 10 minutes and I look up, have I walked 1 mile? And then I'll sit down. I'll make an excuse not to go to my table. So I know, I understand the pain. But that's where scheduling that time sometimes with someone, just say, call a friend and say, or a colleague from this group here and say, let's set up a writing time. And it kind of forces you to sit there and you commit yourself. You're honest with it and sit down and write. And once you start to kind of just look at the topic, one of the things that gets me in is I'm not interested in writing, but I can find some articles or information that gets me in, slowly. So find what works for you to kind of pull you in slowly. And if it's the time of the day that works for you the best, right? Where it needs to be quiet. Or since I have ADD, I listen to this focus music in my headphone. After a little while, it kind of pulls me in and I'm in. Whatever works for you. If you need to go get some food, clean a little bit, don't clean over clean, then you'll spend time doing that. So yeah, get yourself in somehow. And once and just even gibberish, just write, start writing, pull things here, pull things there, and then you'll kind of go into that. Or tell yourself it's just for 30 minutes, right? And then you'll get in as well. So those have worked for me. Anybody else can add to that. And thank you, sure, for the insight on you mentioned earlier that after getting the IRB approval from the university here in UC, we have to get approval from ethics board in Nepal if we're collecting data. Could you please provide more information? Yes, so there's a whole ethics workshop that was done, right? So they died just
Yes.
before
So
me.
I was about to comment on that. So if you want to know about the ethics kind of thing, you should go and look at the first lecture of this series. Dr. Icha Bosnet, discussed a lot about ethics and all that. So it's publicly available. So you should be able to go to our YouTube channel, and then it's recorded. It's there. There is
Yeah.
one question about, I know we are towards the end, but there is one question about power calculation. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. So power analysis is usually aligned with reporting your significance in your quantitative data analysis, right? At what sample size can you claim that your hypothesis has been, significantly supported or refuted? So usually there's also a tool, if you Google power analysis, there's a tool that lets you put in sample size for what so at what confidence level, 95% confidence level, then it lets you kind of plug in and gives you a sample size. Usually for 95% confidence level, I think a power analysis comes out to 400 plus sample. So I mean that's a analysis that's used again to provide more rigor to your study. Now, do you have to have 400 plus sample size? No. There have been studies done with less sample size without doing that power analysis as well. But adding a power analysis to your sampling kind of gives you the more confidence in saying that your study's findings are significant and a generalizability to a certain level. And I think the statistics workshop should be able to give you a lot more on that.
Yes, I think I was about to say that, our next lecture is by Dr. Bhatta, and it's on September 9th, so he'll probably touch a little bit on that because most of the time it's going to be what presentations of the results in the form of tables and figures, right, Dr. Bhatta?
Right. And just to comment on that, the power analysis, that would be something you'd have thought about when you're designing the study, right? How
Mhm.
many people do I need to recruit to be in my study? So if you have done that, then you put that in your method section, but for some
Right.
reason that was not what you did, then it may not go into that. So Dr. Sharma has included stuff that could potentially go in that. But if you don't have that, maybe then you can't put it in. But again, that would come in the
Yeah.
design phase of the study to see how many people I need to get the valid results that's going to be meaningful, right?
Mhm. Yes. Yes. So again, not all studies will have that. Yeah. Good. Are we supposed to provide summary of literature, including the outliers before the gap, or just the summary and the gap? Um, the summary, are you talking about, so when I meant by outliers in qualitative study are these specific one observation or two observation that you're making out of that. So in qualitative study, you are going to be focusing on that topic anyways. That is your outlier anyways, usually, right? So so do you have to provide your literature review for qualitative study explaining your population? Yes, then you will have to. Yes. In qualitative study, you don't want a whole lot of literature review. If you have that, provide it very succinctly and moving on, because your study is more about exploration than about that outlier piece, right? And what is the experience of that person, or how is this phenomenon building up? So yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. I think in the interest of time, we'll have to wrap it up. So if specifically fellows, if you have any questions, please do write to us. We will forward it to Dr. Sharma or, other colleagues who might be able to answer. As I said also in the chat box, the recording will be available to those who attended today, and we also make it available publicly. Okay, so with that, please join me in thanking Dr. Sharma for enlightening us with this, really, really important phase of manuscript writing. Thank you, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So if Dr. Bhatta, Dr. Madeku, Dr. Sharma, if you can stay back. I don't know if Dr. Archana Shrestha is here, but if you are, please stay back. But for others, we will see you all on September 9th.